Welcome to CMMS Radio, a podcast and general resource for all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, from selection to implementation to help you make better choices and have a successful CMMS journey. We'll bring in experts along the way to help us learn more about CMMS, facilities operations, and much more. If you need help with the CMMS project, send a message at CMMSradio.com using the What's on Your Mind link. Suggest a topic, share your CMMS story, or ask questions. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Today, we are joined by George Williams of ReliabilityX, the DNA of success. And he is also the host of Practical Reliability. That's a podcast that's built all around reliability to help maintenance professionals around the world learn best practices in maintenance and reliability. George, welcome to the show. It's been a long time since we were able to get this going, finally able to do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be on your podcast. You have phenomenal guests on a regular basis and cover really important topics.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I was actually introduced to you by someone that was on the podcast previously that encouraged me to get in touch with you. And then we had that awesome interaction when we did the happy hour with Steve Baumgartner, and that was a blast. So I really appreciate you making the time. One of the things I'd like to do is just give you a few minutes to give us some background about, kind of your experience and how that led up to the forming of ReliabilityX. So how did that all start going back prior to that, and then bringing us up to when it launched?
How long is the podcast? No, I'm just kidding. I'll do the synopsis, the short version here. So, I guess my background is I went to a VOTech high school, so I was a STEM kid at heart. I mean, I grew up ripping stuff apart and trying to put it back together unsuccessfully over and over again. Went to a VOTech high school, took electromechanical, and then I went to college. Had a family really young, had to drop out of college, took a couple of different maintenance jobs, and ultimately ended up as, believe it or not, a painter for a very large pharmaceutical company. I held several positions there with increasing responsibility, all the way up through being responsible for asset management globally for them. So while I was there, I got all my certifications in maintenance and reliability, and ultimately a master's degree in reliability engineering, maintenance and reliability engineering from Monash University. In 2015, I left that organization early 2016 and went to a large medical device company, family-run medical device company. I was there for about 3 years, although I have to say I wanted to start ReliabilityX initially leaving the large pharmaceutical company, but the timing of everything wasn't perfect. And so I put my heart and soul into next position, but we weren't really a cultural fit. I kind of clashed with some leadership in terms of philosophical approach to maintenance and reliability. And I felt it was more of a success through people kind of thing. And unfortunately, that wasn't exactly how they were seeing it. So I thought the timing was right, and it was time to formulate ReliabilityX. And together with my partner Joe Anderson, we jumped ship and made this our day job. And that's kind of how we started. We started the company about 6 months prior to COVID, which of course was a fantastic thing to do. And our first client was actually in Canada. And so that was an extreme challenge. The company almost folded before it got off the ground. So that's kind of who we are. Well, at least that's my general background. I'm a CMRP, a CRL. I've won an Uptime Award for Best Maintenance and Reliability Program while at that large pharmaceutical company. I've won CMRP of the Year as well. And in addition to ReliabilityX, I also teach for the University of Wisconsin as part of their Maintenance and Reliability Certificate Program.
Awesome. And just a little bit of news that we saw drop this week, and I want to say congratulations to you and your team that you crossed 3,000 followers on LinkedIn. That's a big deal.
Yeah, so far so good. We've got an amazing graphic design, social media, and marketing person. She's not just amazing because she's my daughter. She just happens to be really good at what she does. And AJ, who's part of our team now for the last 2 years, has just done outstanding. I mean, when it was just me and Joe, we had no followers. I mean, personally, I've got a bunch, but as a company, we had nothing. And she is pretty steadily growing our network, which is fantastic.
It's great. I love watching it. And so you and I, we talked a little bit previously before we are going to jump on and do this recording. And with CMMS Radio, obviously it's about computerized maintenance management software or systems or solutions, whatever anybody wants to call that. And I personally don't care too much about products themselves or their features per se. I'm more interested in process. But you and I touched on something that's really interesting. So I believe maintenance and reliability is at the heart of why a CMMS can exist and how it can drive impact. I don't think the solutions themselves drive the impact by themselves. You have to have that human involvement. But you and I had a discussion about CMMS and the design intent that adds value. So I wanted to kind of bring that up and just start talking about that. What do you mean by that?
Wow, there's a lot of pieces to this question. So first and foremost, I agree. I think depending on the organization's objectives and goals, there's a CMMS that fits, and it's not for every organization. There's one CMMS that fits them all, and so they have to shop around. They have to do their due diligence. There's a whole conversation around that we can have whenever you like. In terms of the design intent of the CMMS, it has to be designed in a way to allow the business process functions to take place that add value to the organization, and not we have to redesign all of our business functions to suit the CMMS. That doesn't necessarily mean like customization, and then obviously lots of conversations around customization versus configuration there. So I'll use basic terms. You shouldn't have to touch the code to make it fit your business process. But some business processes that add a lot of value are not terribly complex. And depending on the organization, a CMMS that is simplified and provides that value is the best value they should be going after. And in other places, there's lots of very complicated business processes that deal with things like multiple currencies and multiple languages and all kinds of other things. And you need a different level of CMMS. The CMMS design intent needs to be around the processes that add value to the business. And I think fundamentally, we also had a conversation around the design intent structure of location versus asset.
We did.
And for me, location is king. Whether it's a functional location, meaning a P&ID drawing identifier, or a physical location in the case of heavy facilities run organizations. I don't believe the design approach of having things like criticality on the asset record is appropriate. I think it's in the wrong place. I can move the asset, I can swap it out, I can change it, I can do all kinds of things. The P&ID drawing and what the asset is doing within a specific system is what drives its criticality, right, and the value that it brings to the business. So I think there's some. I think many CMMSs have come to that conclusion and offer the option of putting criticality in both of those places, depending on what your philosophical approach is, whether it's location driven or asset driven. But I also think there's a minor design flaw in, or at least from my point of view, how I would design it if I built one from the ground up would be really around component failure modes and not the physical asset, because all assets are just a combination of components. And whether it's a packaging machine or a pump, it's got specific components and they fail in specific ways, and you address that through your strategy, right? Whether it's a PM strategy or predictive strategy, whatever the asset strategy is. If we have a design a design intent that's down to failure mode of component, then everything is just a construct of what components exist, and your maintenance strategy builds itself.
Now, with that being said, then, say, for example, you've got lots of different organizations out there that aren't doing it exactly that way. Is that some of the type of thing that you encounter at ReliabilityX when you're in consulting and helping people to get on that path to process improvement, like looking at the gaps? Is that a lot of what you do, is come in and kind of fix that methodology that's being incorporated to get them moving better?
Uh, Trick question. So for us, what we do is look at where the value is and go after the value. And many of the places we go, and many clients, or not even clients, folks that just reach out for advice, because we offer lots of free advice when people reach out. Oftentimes they are what I would consider to be at the infancy of CMMS. They've got some assets in there, they've got some locations, it's all time-based PMs, and that's about it. Does that mean they are an unsuccessful maintenance organization? By no means. By no means. They can be producing at design rate of the plant and pumping stuff out through brute force. You do not need, and I know you're probably not going to cringe at this statement, but a CMMS is a nice to have to be a good maintenance organization. It is a necessity to continually improve your maintenance organization in terms of the effectiveness of your strategy and the efficiency of your workforce. If you are perfectly fine paying more money and being less efficient, you can be a fantastic maintenance organization on paper. And so the CMMS's role is realistically to provide the data necessary to be the best you can possibly be. Not that everyone else is a failure.
Right. Right. In fact, what's nice about that statement is that it's really going to start with your like I said in the beginning, that I'm less interested in the CMMS itself and more interested in the process behind it, and that starts with the people and the process absent a CMMS. So if you are using paper, heck, years ago for me, I think we talked about this, where I was in an environment in the 90s where we wanted to be really good at maintenance. We wanted to deliver on our promises of maintenance of buildings, different things. And for us, it was about understanding where are the people, places, and things, regardless of whether we had a system or not. But we would type it all out, and we would type it out in duplicate or triplicate, issue those work orders, and people would follow that process. That is, in fact, where the advent or invention of or implementation of some form of CMMS, I don't care if it's Excel or whatever, you go through that maturation, because now you want data so you can get a past, present, and future view. That's the opportunity that's created by a CMMS at its basic level. So I think that statement, rather than being cringeworthy, is more like an aha moment. We can, you know, let's lean in on a little bit of pausation, which is actually a word, and say, oh wow, okay, we've got our process in place, and now how do we, like a CMMS web enables that in the modern day, right? Yeah, you call it ASP, software as a service, whatever. The idea is, let's do what we do, let's do it really, really well. So what is your take on this concept? And I learned this from Brian Bieski, who I know that you know, and he talked about on one of our episodes how doing the basics of maintenance really, really well is what matters first.
Yeah,
So
no
talk to
doubt.
us a little bit about that.
Look, you can have the greatest database in the world. If you can't execute, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Or if you execute poorly, or if you install wrong, or if you don't understand what a torque value is, or if you roll belts on a shiv still. Like there's lots and lots of technical expertise necessary to do this job, and the CMMS is an enabler to that, in terms of reminders of what steps to do, but that can get to a level of detail that is offensive to a well-qualified technical staff. But it really is the same reason a pilot that has a checklist every time they walk around the plane. They don't get to skip that because it's important. They don't get to skip that regardless of how many hours of flight they have. They don't get to skip that based on how many trainings they've gone to. They still get the checklist. And our maintenance assets are not any less valuable than the aircraft is to an airline. They perform a function that's a necessity for the business. And I think the combination of two things, the technical skill set of the folks doing the work and the investment in their technical skill set, along with the education of why they exist. One of the other troubles that we've run into is folks don't know why they exist as a maintenance organization. And if you ask them, they can't really point to the business goals or the objectives. Or if you ask them what the design speed rate of a line in their plant is, they have no idea. So what are you doing the PM for? Like, what are we there for? It's your job is not to respond to problems. Your job is the same as all of the other people in the company. Your job is to achieve the company goals in the most efficient and effective way you possibly can. And if the company goals are to produce X number of millions of units a year, then that's the goal of the maintenance organization. Your role is to figure out what strategy is going to deliver that, and then request funding to make sure that strategy happens. And hopefully you get approval for that. And I know that's often a challenge, and certainly finding skill sets that is a challenge too. But, the goal is not fix it when it breaks or make the machine run bad, corrugate or bad incoming raw materials. And oftentimes the maintenance organization is just seen as, look, when the product comes in, somehow this case erector doesn't work right. Well, there's nothing wrong with the case erector. You're giving it terrible product and you don't have any incoming raw material inspections. And there's lots of reasons why maintenance responds. And, for folks that are listening, if you want to know how often you respond to things like that, where it's not really maintenance issues, look inside your CMMS at all the times you respond to something and don't replace a part. I mean, there are times where a part is not necessary, like frayed wires and simple things like that. But oftentimes you're responding to things that are just process related, that don't exist, that are outside of the CMMS control.
And so there's two things in everything you said there that I'm curious about. One is really around how we tie that meaningful why, the intentionality behind what we do as maintenance personnel or managers and supervisors and C-suite. What have you seen? Now, I'm not saying we can solve this, but I'm saying, what have you seen that's an effective way to bridge that internal gap where we're tying maintenance and maintenance operations to top line revenue so that it's meaningful across the board? Everybody's running against the same why.
Yeah. So this is pretty straightforward and something we teach on a fairly regular basis. Let's say I'm going to ask you a basic question. What percentage of maintenance managers out there do you feel have a difficult time getting the funding and resources necessary to do what they need to do to achieve the company goals?
I'd say at least 80, if not higher.
All right. And do you believe it's because the funding doesn't exist?
No.
Do you believe it's because having the equipment operate appropriately is not important?
No, I think that's important. I think the error is in, as we go up the food chain, so to speak, the hierarchy, it's still treated as a cost as opposed to a relevant factor to the movement of the organization towards top line revenue.
And whose fault is that? Is it the conveyor or the receiver of the information?
Well, my initial answer before you said those two options is I think it's leadership loses through their process of being part of leadership and so damn busy, and CFOs looking at the numbers, they lose sight of why they were originally there and why we're an entire organizational team.
And I would also argue that it's not you, but it's you. If you're trying to convince senior leadership that investing in the reliable operation of their equipment is a good idea and you're failing miserably, it's likely You don't know your audience well enough, whether they are a numbers person or a people person. And so you're conveying your needs inaccurately. You don't know the company goals. And so you're having difficulty conveying how your needs achieve those goals directly. And I think there's lots of learning opportunity. I don't think any of that is the fault of people in those positions. And here's why. Oftentimes they were a decent mechanic and got promoted to a supervisor, and they got no training in how to supervise people. And then they became a planner and they got no training in how to plan. And maybe they had some success at planning and they became the maintenance manager and they got zero training in how to develop a budget, zero training in how to lead people, zero training in how to communicate in a room full of everybody else that has a degree and potentially they don't. And so they're put in a position of insecurity, and they're put in a position of immediately feeling like they are the last dog at the bowl, or they feel like they don't speak the same language as everyone else. And oftentimes that's because in some cases the people in those positions above them and at the table with them have a certain ego and need to lay down their education level so that people can hear it just because they feel like it, and they make things difficult on purpose. And other times it's because that person, the maintenance manager role, doesn't necessarily know how to or have the confidence to be an equal member of that team. And I don't believe it's through any of their fault, but I do believe that they need to be educated in a way to allow that. And I'll give a brief example. If I go to most maintenance managers across the country and I ask them what all the company goals were, I don't know that they would be able to answer that question. But if you go to www.insertyourcompanynamehere.com/about us, you're going to learn everything you need to know. There's going to be specific commitments to your customers, specific commitments to either investors or, to profit. There'll be specific goals around throughput or growth. There'll be specific goals around safety. There'll be specific goals around quality. And we can list a couple others like community service and being a good steward and all those things, and energy goals. If we look at all the different all the different departments inside a company, there's really only two that hit every check mark. And what I mean by that is, does maintenance impact whether or not you'll be profitable? Yes. Does maintenance impact whether or not you have a good safety record? Yes, directly. Does maintenance impact the quality of your product? Absolutely. Does maintenance impact your environmental goals? 100%. Does maintenance impact your commitment to employees? Absolutely. And you can check all the boxes. And to some degree, operations checks all the boxes. Finance, HR, safety. I'm not sure they check every box directly. At the end of the day, here's what a company does. They research and develop product, and then they purchase equipment and operate and maintain it in order to produce that product. So they have to R&D stuff, and then they have to operate and maintain it. Everything else helps that happen. Everything else helps that happen, including the C-suite. So in the maintenance manager role and in a role of trying to make progress in maintenance and reliability, understanding and developing a partnership with the people that run the groups, the departments that have direct goals, and how you can help them is your best friend. Meaning, go to the person responsible for safety and have a conversation with them around how PMs have a lower safety impact than corrective maintenance, and show them the documentation and all the white papers that prove it. And they will now support you in trying to do more PMs and less emergency work. Go to finance and figure out what downtime costs. Develop partnerships with the people who run those departments that have direct goals. Because oftentimes maintenance has their own goals, but they're not direct company goals. You're a support function to achieving company goals, but much more than a necessary evil in achieving those goals. And so having a conversation with the folks that have those direct goals, so that when you are in a room full of people and making requests and pitching your ideas that will achieve goals, you've now had previous conversations with folks around how it helps achieve their goals, and they are more likely to support you. Does it mean they will always support you? Absolutely not. Does it mean you'll always get your request through? Absolutely not. But understanding how you develop partnerships and get people on, look, your goal is your goal. And I had a mentor years ago, a guy named Pete Duraco, because I was famous for writing scathing emails and demanding things. And this is, rough around the edges kind of guy, right? And he asked me to put a Post-it note on my screen that said, "What is your goal?" And that was on my screen for 15 years. And it reminded me on a very regular basis that my goal is more important than my ego. And if I have to develop a partnership with finance to make that happen, then so be it. I'm going to do everything I can to make a partnership with finance so that they give me what I want. The goal is what I want, not aggravate everybody else in the company. Like that's not the goal, right? So develop those partnerships and learn the language you need to speak in order to have people on your side is one of the biggest things. The other piece of advice for folks in those positions that I would give is get people to nod their head up and down and answer simple, basic questions. When you're presenting the leadership, would you rather spend, $12,000 fixing an asset or $600 fixing an asset? Which one should I do? And what are they going to say? Spend the 12 grand? They're going to say spend the 600. And you go, okay, great. If I use predictive technologies, I'll know ahead of time I spend 600. If I don't use them, we fail miserably and I have to rush order parts and have ancillary damage and I spend this. So can I do this and spend less, or should I keep spending more and wasting your money? They've already answered the question. At this point, they have to back up from what they said and show a lack of integrity. So put people between a rock and a hard place is not a terrible thing.
Well, it gets the most important thing done, and that is a decision, a choice. A lot of people of late talk about, and I, I think we can all be guilty, for lack of a better word, of this, but more is lost through indecision than a wrong decision. And another thing I keep hearing with what you're saying, and I'm imagining people in a room, two people in a hallway, and their goals aren't aligned because they're not focusing on a combination of the missions and the values of the organization first and foremost, and then how they move through the world, which means their day. The thing that seems to be missing, and it's easy to talk about how it's achieved, but you have to be willing to go through the work in this area as well, and that is influence. To have influence in any situation, whether we're talking about maintenance and reliability, CMMS, or at home with the family, with the wife, with the all of this, right? Influence is about being influenceable. So if I want to get what I want, I better make it about what you want. So if I'm talking to the CFO and I want approval for something, I better damn well know what matters to that CFO instead of having an argument. Because if you don't have influence, the only thing you're going to have is a power struggle. So I've often told people, like in internal environments, that the easy way for me to always remember that, I'm not saying it's easy to do, is I have two ears and one mouth. Like even right now, I'm talking too much. So this is the secret to getting what you want by focusing on what someone else wants, right? I keep hearing that throughout everything that you're saying is let's get cards on the table and let's not get, hurt over everything. I'm not saying I don't do that. I go ballistic over everything.
Well,
So
and you have to grow both direct and indirect influence, right? And direct, you can grow direct influence in your office. You can't grow indirect influence in your own office. I can be in charge of somebody and bring them into my office and be very direct, and I can explain things to them and all kinds of stuff. I can't make the CFO come to my office.
Right.
So indirect influence happens out of your own office. Direct influence happens, in person with the folks that are your peer network, and that can happen in your office. And most influence happens, outside of your office altogether, or any office. Go walk the plant floor. Go say hello to operators in the morning. Ask them how they're doing. Observe the challenges they have and go solve problems. And it's not just in manufacturing. I mean, even in heavy facilities organizations, go listen to the pulse of the facility. Everything has a rhythm. And if you walk either the plant or the facility, you know when it's not in rhythm. You know it. Get off your desk, get off your seat and get out of your desk. And you mentioned indecision, and that's one of my pet peeves. And nothing develops indecision more than meetings. And incorrectly run meetings drive nothing but indecision. When no one knows who owns the decision, how can you make a decision? How many times you go into a meeting and everybody's trying to come to consensus? What's consensus for? The reason we have follow-up meetings to the meeting is because we don't come to consensus because we think we need a consensus. You don't need a consensus. You need somebody in charge of the decision. And they're responsible for telling everybody else to come prepared to the meeting, give me all the information you have so I can make the right decision, and then go make the decision. What happens in today's environment is we have a meeting and we're not quite sure who owns the decision, but we're going to decide something. And we sit in a room for somehow every time exactly 1 hour, which boggles my mind ungodly. Somehow we need an exact hour to do anything. And then at the end of it, because we didn't come to consensus, we're going to have a follow-up meeting. That's ludicrous to me.
I know for me, I've experienced highly productive meetings and mostly the exact opposite. Lot of what I've seen and experienced is all the good stuff is flying around, but it's not being like enabled, right? Somebody's you've heard of the QBR, right? We go to quarterly business reviews and we're talking about all this stuff, what we're going to do as it pertains to our specific role and how that contributes to the company's goals and all that, regardless of what industry you're in. And we get some good stuff going, but then after that meeting, none of the stuff that was being talked about ever really happens. But then what happens is, whether it's utilization and adoption of a CMMS platform, or a CMMS company that's like, well, how are we going to grow in this way, or maintenance and reliability scenario where they want to solve some specific problems relative to team A, team B's got their own, everybody talks about it. Yeah. And then nothing happens. Those individuals, those guys and gals that are trying to participate in that meeting, when nothing happens, they're just going to feel even more that it's a waste of time. So how do you fix that? Is because for me, it was over the years, less meetings, more action. Let's you've heard of the 10-minute stand-up meeting, or let's come in, we got a punch list of 5 things, everybody, let's get together, let's brainstorm, how do we solve this? And then somebody has to agree, okay, we're going to solve it this way, everybody go and do it. Is that how you do it, or is there a better way?
There's lots of different ways, and lots of different either books or acronymed approaches to decision making that streamline that process. They all kind of boil down to a couple of factors. The first and foremost is have an agenda. Have an agenda and a RACI so everybody knows what the role is. Well, I guess even before that, first and foremost is don't have a meeting if there's no decision to be made. If there's no decision, it's an email. It's called information. Mm-hmm. If the decision is to be made and you need information and input from others, that's what a meeting is for. Prior to the meeting, send out an agenda. Here's what we're going to discuss. Here's how much time on each topic. Here's what everybody's role is within that topic. I need information from Greg on which CMMS systems he recommends that we do an evaluation of. And then we have a meeting. The next piece of it is the person in charge of the meeting should always do a play-by-play. And if you've been in well-run meetings, you know that pretty much this is how it goes. All right, in today's meeting, we're going to cover these 3 topics. We're going to decide on shortlisting our vendors for CMMS demos. We're going to identify who's going to do all the coordination for those demos. And then we're going to set a schedule to score and rank those demos, right? Greg, you're up. What do you think the list is of the people we should be looking at, right? And whoever else I want an input from, I go to the next person and I go, okay, Joe, give me your list of 3 people shortlisted. Okay, Sally, give me your list of 3 people shortlisted. And at the end of that, I've got a short list. And I go, okay, well, hey, look, 75% of everybody's list matches. We're picking these 3. Have a nice day. Next topic. And they do a play-by-play of the meeting, which means it's not allowed to get out of control. It's not allowed to go off topic. And if you are managing or running a meeting, it is in your best interest to have an agenda, to inform everybody ahead of time. And if people come unprepared, just stop the meeting. Done. Over. Done. I'll make the decision. I'll figure out the 3. You came unprepared. I can't help that. If you have no input, your input was 0, not you had no input. You had an opportunity for input. You chose not to prepare. You chose not to give it. I'm making a decision. So have an agenda, figure out who's responsible for what, send that out ahead of time, give them any pre-reading, whatever you need. And during the meeting, do a play-by-play. Don't allow it to go out of control, and do not accept I'm unprepared. There's only a couple of times that's going to happen. And after that, everybody comes to your meeting prepared.
Right. So let me add something to that. So we're going to pretend for a minute that we had the meeting and we decided on a solution. We decided with input from the people that are actually going to use the solution, along with input from the top down, all this kind of stuff. And now we're back to a CMMS based conversation. We've got our solution, it's been implemented, and we're doing work orders, and we got some preventive maintenance going on with some of our assets. Now, we go back out to all those people that were involved in that initial decision, and we find out a couple of things that they just didn't know during that meeting. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know until we implemented and tried to get adoption going on this platform. And we're using it at a base level, and we hear from a couple of people, well, I don't really like that system, and I don't like how it works. But now let's pretend you've been at this a year and a half. Investment, time, effort, and let's say we haven't had too much turnover. People are all still there. What do? Do you go in and look for the root cause within the platform, or first look for the root cause within the people that are supposed to adopt it?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, that you got to demand more than I don't like it. They have to have a actual valid, quantifiable impact. So let's say, for example, the system, let's say the system doesn't allow you to automatically reserve materials without, I don't know, for some reason, physically going to the storeroom. And so people have to wait for their parts because that all takes place when they're standing at the counter. There's a quantifiable number to that. Do some time studies, figure out what it's costing the business. If you can figure out that it's costing the business something, the first thing to do is go back to the vendor and say, well, what's going on? Is this just not available inside this system? Did we configure it wrong? What's going on? The second is, if you can quantify it, replace it. Don't die on the sword. Like, don't die on it. Whatever adds business value. Now, there was a cost to doing the whole implementation, so that business value is measured against the entire implementation cost of something else, right? The other thing is to always have, when you do these evaluations, they can't just be, hey, we picked 3 vendors, they show up and do a 30-minute can demo and we select a system. I mean, you've got to have a much more robust approach than that. You have to have actual business requirements documented before you even go out for your initial RFP or even your RFI. So I would send a request for information out with a list of all of my requirements and ask for anything other than yes, no answers of does this do it? You're looking for how does it achieve it, not yes, no. If a vendor gives you a bunch of yes, no answers in your RFI, do not even down select them because they're all going to say, yes, it's software. Of course I can do it. Some of it might mean I have to configure it, or it's going to cost a fortune to make it happen, but they just go yes, no, right? You want to know, is it an out of the box functionality? Is it straightforward? How does it achieve it? And you want more information on all of your requirements of the system. And they could be basic requirements. The system has to auto generate PMs at least 30 days in advance, whatever, whatever it is. And they have to be able to answer to you, well, how does it do it? Okay, nightly, it goes through a review of all the PM shells and it decides what's going to be, here's the answer. Get something more than yes, no. Once you have a requirement list, you can go out for requests for information, and then you have to score the responses, right? So you score everybody's responses and decide how to down select. The biggest issue is, if you're doing things right, the largest issue you have is who's all the vendors you're going to send the RFI out to, because there's just hundreds.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you could miss a really good system very easily, because there's lots of them out there that are less known, whether it's in the United States or anywhere else, but are still very viable systems. And then, of course, you've got to go through the demo. And for me, the demo piece of this always has to be a scripted demo. I do not allow a vendor to come in with a canned approach. If you do not create the records right in front of me, you're out. Because it's not does the functionality exist that matters to the end user. It's how complicated it is to do it.
That's right. So it's interesting, everything you talked about. So in my we're just going to call it 20 years as a placeholder in CMMS, a primary product based on a very specific process that's highly adaptable, covers essentially all the bases, all these things, right? We'd get in these scenarios, first and foremost, RFIs and RFPs, 9 times out of 10, we wouldn't play because it spoke to a process that wasn't necessarily where we could drive the most value. So we were doing a service to the client and ourselves. But when it came to demonstrations, there was always this view that I had. I would sit on these demos in the early years, and our founder and CEO would run these demos, and he's showing everything and anything and all this stuff. And it was cool. It was great stuff. But I'd get to this point where it's like, no, that's an excessively complex process for everyone, because you can only take information in little bits. And if we're dealing with someone that hasn't had a system ever before, which is very common, a lot of people still don't have anything that they're using because they're overwhelmed. They don't know what to expect, right? They don't know what to pick. So what I would do with my demo process is I would do a generalized approach, but I was always prepared to deviate during the demonstration when I heard the right question and where I needed to go. But I would show exactly how the system would do what they wanted to do in a straightforward, simplistic way, because I always felt that the top knows what they want. They want to see that they can get it. But the people that have to use this damn thing, they need to know, how easy is this or how complicated is it? I just need to know.
Right.
That's
and
what
that's
I
a
need to
big
know.
piece of the demo, is understanding how complicated it is and what the user interface is like. And oftentimes when scoring demos, one of the biggest factors is how complicated it was to do. And I do really basic scripting, right? It's create a location record, create an asset, put the asset in that location, create a second location, move the asset, create a spare part, create a PM, create a task list, put the spare part on the task list, give the PM a due date, make the system generate a PM, run the work order, execute the work order, close it out, right?
Yep.
Really basic stuff. But
And
I want
maybe some report data.
right.
A little bit of
At the end
report
of it,
data.
show me all your fancy reports. But what I want to see is, can they even do that? Because oftentimes just that is, well, in order to do that, I've got to create this equipment template record first. And then there's like all these other things that you don't realize go into administering the system. And I don't mean to say you would not select the system or you would select the system. All I mean is you wouldn't know it in a demo. And if you don't force them to create the records right in front of you, you don't see the back end complication of administration. And maybe the system is so good and it's so perfect for your processes that that's just fine, but you need to plan on the administrative workload. So it still might be the right system. I'm not saying that systems that have a lot of administrative workload are bad. I'm simply saying, as a client, you need to know it. You need to
Right.
know it when they come in. If it's a administrative heavy system, oftentimes those systems run very seamlessly and they have great approaches and there's nothing wrong with them, but you don't know it in the demo. And it also adds to how much training you need. And there's just factors that you have to understand when going through the demo. And usually the canned demo where they already have pre-created records won't show you any of that.
Yes, unless unless they can show how that came to exist in a way that makes sense. Because
Right.
what you want to be careful of if you're someone that's looking for and utilizing CMMS platforms is, you know, the companies out there, the reps and all that, at some level they're chasing a number. So as a potential client of a CMMS, I encourage people to ask the really, really hard questions because the right vendor is going to have answers, or they're not going to have answers, but they're going to treat you the right way. That's what I think people should be looking for. And then if you're a vendor out there providing a CMMS, I don't care which one it is. If you want to check that box that says, yes, we do that, but you know internally it's in a roundabout way, I'm not a huge fan of that because that starts leaning towards selling at all costs. I know we have to hit a number, but hit the number right. You know, it's your bogey. It's there, but get the right kind of opportunities.
Even that's
We
hard nowadays when we talk about the skill set shortage in maintenance and the labor shortage in maintenance. That's no different in sales. These
it's
people
true.
are changing positions to get a promotion and to make more money, and so oftentimes, folks that are in those positions have little to no training. They've got a demo environment. They come in and they show a couple of records that they got trained with. They've never had to be
Right.
a user. So it's very difficult to ask tough questions because oftentimes you get, well, I'm going to have to get back to you because I don't know. And I feel for those folks that are in that position, but that's the day and age we just happen to find ourselves in. And that can be a challenge as well, is just making sure that the person who shows up to the demo is more than just the, and I hate to say it like that. A salesperson can be incredibly knowledgeable, and there's lots and
Absolutely.
lots of them that are incredibly knowledgeable. So I don't mean to knock anybody who has done their due diligence and used the system, but oftentimes they've never had to be an actual user and they've never had to work within the maintenance process. So it's very tough for them to answer questions that are relatable to the folks at the shop floor level.
Yeah, that's where there's ways to bridge that gap as well, right? If a client's looking for something and they might need to pull in a consultant that can help look for those gaps and help both players, right?
We
The
do a lot
client
of that
and
work.
yeah, that's that. I mean, it's you could have a young rep that's handling their own demo because the sales engineer, all three of them are booked on other demos, and it's got to be done, and they can get through that because the consultant might be able to coach through for them to help their client learn more about that system. So they're going to be really good later, and that doesn't mean they're bad. So I think it's important that you said you're not trying to knock anybody. Everybody's out here trying to do good work. Some of them are moving so damn fast,
That's right.
they're actually not allowed to care because if they do, they're going to get jammed up and they're going to get fired,
Yeah.
or something like that. These are really big conversations, and so what I try to do with each episode is I want to keep it, kind of consumable. We're at a point now where I want to switch because we're going to be doing more of these. You and I already talked about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I'm
I
all
I
over it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I love what you guys are doing and the way we can talk really real about this stuff. And I don't have to swear too much, but I like a little bit of that too. I'd like to know how people can get in touch with you to start their own conversation or to enlist the services of ReliabilityX?
Yep.
And if you could give us a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. No worries. And so just to kind of give a little bit of background on what ReliabilityX does. So we focus in two major areas in maintenance and reliability and operational excellence. For folks that are non-manufacturing or just maintenance organizations, we do everything soup to nuts from an asset management perspective, including CMMS consulting and implementation and training services. For folks in the manufacturing space, we actually have a very specific expertise in operational excellence and the ability to get you closer to design rates of your equipment through the maintenance organization. So we've got a lot of focus there. We're also a very heavy training organization. We've got online self-paced CMRP training classes, online self-paced MLT1 certification classes, and all kinds of in-person type classes. All that information, of course, is available at our website, www.reliabilityx.com. You can reach out to us at 877-RLBLTYX. You can email us at ask@reliabilityx.com. And we do a lot to connect to us on LinkedIn. We've got a YouTube channel, the Practical Reliability Podcast, available on all platforms. And get involved. One of the things we love to do is have interviews with folks that are shop floor level and really pick their brain and understand their challenges. The more we learn from those folks, the better service we provide to our customers. And that's a direct correlation, right? I mean, it's the reason we teach so much. And how much we, teach for University of Wisconsin and other organizations that Ramesh teaches for. We do a lot of that teaching to keep our pulse on what's happening in maintenance and reliability, because that's, you don't always see that just by reading magazines and stuff like that. So those things are really important. We'll also be at the Reliable Plant Conference. We have a booth there. We'll be at Maximo World. We have a booth there. We'll be at SMRP. We'll be at the International Maintenance Conference. We will also be at AWWA has a water infrastructure conference in Philadelphia in September. We'll be at that as well.
Okay, and SMRP is also in September. And speaking of Reliable Plant, just a quick shout out for everybody on that. I know you guys will have a booth there, and I'm going to head out to finally, after all these years, get to go to that conference. Reliable Plant is happening in Orlando, Florida, July 31st through August 3rd. There is going to be a lot of horsepower there when it comes to knowledge around maintenance and reliability. Obviously, it's called Reliable Plant, but everything is so practically applicable to what you do in facilities, maintenance, reliability as a standalone, on and on and on. So everybody should check that out. There's also some ways you can still get a discount if you want to go to that particular conference. But George, I really appreciate you coming on with me today. This is going to be just the first of many. I want to keep this going. And with that, have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.